Okay. I think I think we got some people here. So, as always, let me know if you can, in fact, hear me. And we will give people a couple minutes to show up and then dive into some stuff. Because we're going to talk about LitRPG things and then some life and content administration things for what's going on there. Hopefully, everybody had a good holiday. I know I have been a potato, just a complete log, because I we actually finished a milestone with book two last week. So I ended up taking this week off, um, which has been really nice and also helped me realize a couple of things in terms of how I need to be managing my time and that kind of thing. Um, so I'll be talking about that some. Okay. No, hang on. Cool. Oh, hey, Becca. Yeah, I hope you had a good holiday. I have no idea how many people are going to show up because, and part of the problem with me taking the week off is there were a bunch of mistakes in the email notifications for this live stream that I didn't see until I was looking at stuff yesterday. Uh, so that's interesting, but I'm frustrating, trying to look at those kinds of mistakes a little bit differently for my own sanity, which again I'll talk about more later, but the main thing there is I'm not I am not the most detail oriented person. I want to do the best I can and I want to maintain things and do a good job with everything. I miss details. It is common for me to miss details, and when I'm stressed or when I am tired or when I'm overloaded, that gets worse, like way worse. So I'm starting to try and think of those things of when I notice a bunch of things that seem really obvious that I shouldn't have missed, trying to use those as maybe indicators that I should pay attention to some other stuff and that I might be too stressed, too overworked, something to that effect. Doesn't make it much less frustrating, but I don't know. It's made it a little bit a little bit more manageable. So yeah, okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So I had been calling this one like the noob's guide to lit RPG or something to that effect, depending on where I was talking about it and where I was posting the notifications. So we are going to be going over the basics of the genre and a little bit of like why people like it, some of the good, some of the bad, some of the things that you might want to consider if you are looking at picking it up, either as a reader or a writer. And then, like I said, we'll end off with some things that are going to be changing on my end. So naturally, I was sick last week, and I have been recovering this week. So there's still some coughing and stuff that I will try to get muted so there's not any problems with any of that. So, first off, just what is lit RPG? if you haven't heard of it or you've heard of it, you don't know what it is. It's a weird subgenre that is it's a lot of fun and it's very very interesting, or it can be a lot of fun, be very interesting. Basically, so LitRPG stands for literary role playing game. And that doesn't mean that it's a choose your own adventure. That doesn't mean that it is a tabletop RPG where you are telling literary stories through an RPG. No, it is taking fiction, fiction novels, and putting game mechanics into the story. So, and anybody who's come to these before knows that the second I start recording, my nose starts itching. It always, every time. But one of the best examples I have is actually one of my favorite series, and it is Viridian Gate Online. The concept behind that one is it started initially, it was going to be a MMORPG, a mass multiplayer online RPG game, where people would load up into fully immersive virtual reality so that they could feel everything their characters felt. Pain stuff was dampened down a little bit, and memory things were tweaked so that it was a little bit less traumatizing. Still traumatizing, but less traumatizing. And it was basically, it was a lot like World of Warcraft. Um, so they had, one second, it looks like my mic is peaking a lot, and I'm not sure why. But they had your standard classes. Okay, this is bugging me. Hold, please. Okay, that should do it. Make it a little less painful for you guys on your end. So they had a bunch of the standard classes. You could be a rogue, you could be a fighter, you could be a mage, and you fought creatures and completed quests to gain experience. And when you gained experience, your stats would increase. You could invest points into certain attributes. You could unlock abilities that you could then use as you were going through things. So, World of Warcraft or Skyrim or anything like that, fantasy, epic fantasy story, but you have the game mechanics and the character sheets in the book itself. And that appears in a lot of different ways, which we can talk about a little bit later, but that's the basics of what LitRPG is it's taking any kind of novel, speculative fiction, and adding game mechanics to it. It doesn't have to be fantasy either. It could be, there are some people who've tried doing romance lit RPG. You could do mundane life lit RPG. It's just taking, it's like I said, it's just adding game mechanics into something else so that the numbers are tracked, experience is managed, and things progress and level up, which use that word deliberately because lit RPG is part of a larger genre called progression fantasy. And progression fantasy or progression fiction, depending on where you're looking at it, that's just where a big component of the story is the progression of power and skill. Now, some people argue whether lit RPG is under progression fantasy or whether they're under a different umbrella. To a certain extent, it doesn't really matter. But progression fantasy, lit RPG, game lit, cultivation, those all sort of sit in the same area and all kind of scratch the same itch. And lit RPG is one of what I'm starting to think of as the itch genres, which I will talk about later. But it's about scratching that little brain itch. And specifically what it does is it's that need to break down and understand and develop that it really kind of digs at. Being able to see definitive progression with things is very satisfying. The other way it kind of factors in and helps be satisfying is that it sort of fills the role of playing video games or playing tabletop RPGs. It can satisfy that part of your brain. I know that's a big reason of why I initially got into lit RPG. Is that's how somebody pitched it. Is if you wish you could play D&D or video games more, then you should check out lit RPG because good lit RPG will scratch that itch. Just going to drop this a little further. because noise is going into the red. Noise is going into the red more than I like. So that that is the basics of what it is and kind of where it fits in. So putting game mechanics in, ways to level up, ways to develop skills, anything and everything. And Viridian Gate Online is one example. I have a bunch of other examples that I can talk about later, but with LitRPG specifically, because GameLit is similar but slightly different, and I will be honest, I haven't read enough GameLit to fully understand the difference. It seems that LitRPG has a bit more focus on actual stats and numbers, whereas GameLit just acknowledges that there are game elements at play. So, an example of GameLit that isn't necessarily LitRPG, I think it was the Dice of Destiny or something like that, where the characters end up in a game, but aside from that, it feels very much like a fantasy novel. A little bit of gamification, but not a ton. Nowhere near as much as like in Viridian Gate Online. But there's a couple of key elements. Biggest one, obviously, is the game system, the game part of it, the systemization of skills and progressions. Now, with that, you have the system and how the system works. Obviously, a huge thing that you need to figure out if you are delving into writing LitRPG, or something that is going to be a big factor if you're delving into reading LitRPG. So if you don't like magic systems or you don't like systemization of things, LitRPG is probably going to be more annoying. Now, there is a spectrum for that, but that's really where a lot of it sits. The other part of this is figuring out the how and the why for. Like, why is there a system in place? And that actually moves us over into some of the major tropes of LitRPG. And that's, you can almost think of like sub genres, but they're very specific tropes that people use to set up the LitRPG framework so they can then go about telling their LitRPG story. Common ones being that it is literally a game that people are logging into, like Viridian Gate Online, like I think it's Catharsis, Ascend Online. A lot of those are actual games that people are logging into, and that's why the game system exists. And another version that you have, another major trope you see a lot of, is what is called system apocalypse. And that is where, actually, I'll circle back to system apocalypse. Because another version is where you have a world that the system is just part of reality. It is a systemized world. And with these, you can end up with a lot of tropes that are very similar to Portal Fantasy, because a lot of times characters get pulled into this world and have to suddenly deal with the system. 10 Realms is one of those. I think I'm getting that right. I'd have to look it up. But that's a Portal Fantasy. He Who Fights with Monsters is a kind of Portal Fantasy lit RPG slash cultivation. He melds it in a very interesting way. But that's one of the cases, that's one of the explanations for why is this system here. It's just part of reality. Another one of the major tropes is, and that's where the system apocalypse comes in. System apocalypse is where it is our world, and then the system is imposed and applied and suddenly manifests, and it screws everything up. Hence, apocalypse. There's a bunch of these. There's a lot of all of these different kinds of tropes, but Dungeon Crawler Carl is a system apocalypse. Um, I had some others that I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's another one of the major tropes. Another thing that is very very common in LitRPG in terms of character tropes, and some LitRPG authors argue that this is necessary to write compelling LitRPG. I disagree, but I'm also not a multi-million dollar selling LitRPG author, so take that as you will. But they believe that your characters have to have some kind of hook or some kind of hack, some kind of thing that makes them special, that makes them able to deal with things in ways that nobody else can do and just be new and interesting and not only discover the rules but work around the rules. I don't think that is necessary for a good lit RPG story, but again, I am not a multi-million dollar lit RPG author. Some of them are. I'm also not the main target audience for lit RPG, I have learned, which again, when we talk about some of the downsides, that's where that'll come up more. So that's the basics of what lit RPG is, and I kind of talked about why you might want to read it. Again, really, if you like games and you like gaming and you want more of that, you want to do it faster, lit RPG can be a great way to do that, especially if you want to see new and interesting systems that you wouldn't necessarily work as well in a tabletop game, or you can't find a group for tabletop gaming or something like that. Lit RPG can really satisfy that urge, that drive. And again, key elements are the system, but when it comes to actually building your systems, the best thing you can do if you are interested in lit RPG or you want to understand how people are building their systems is to look into game design for tabletop RPGs or just game design for video games, but especially for tabletop RPGs, I find it to be very relevant in a lot of the ways and a lot of the language that gets used when you're talking about the different types of TTRPGs is very useful when you're going through types of lit RPG systems you could build and ways to break it down and will help you spot different things that you can do with it. One of the main things that people will talk about if you're in the TTRPG space a lot is they'll talk about whether a system is crunchy or chewy or a heavy system versus a light system. Heavy crunchy systems just means there's a lot of mechanics, there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of details, there's often a lot of number crunching that you have to go through. Crunchy. And then the softer, chewy ones are the ones where the rules are a little more vague. There's fewer rules. They're a little simpler. They tend to be more light and easier to manage. And right now, most of the successful lit RPG I am seeing is more on the crunchy side. And that goes back to what some people are saying about it needing to have a hack, a loop, a loophole, some kind of quirk. It sort of feeds into that. Um, but with that, that this doesn't have to be fantasy. Again, it can be any genre. There's some lit RPG in sci-fi. There's horror lit RPG. Dungeon Crawler Carl, first and foremost, is horror, and it's fantastic. It's so good. You, like I said, you can have it in sci-fi, and some people have even tried to put it into romance. So, it's the basics of the genre. If you are getting into trying to build it, there's only so much I can say here without us really going down a rabbit hole of how to actually do all of this. But the biggest things to consider are what is it you want to track and figuring out how you want things to progress. And then when you're dealing with abilities and the magic, breaking down abilities further than you are probably used to with fantasy. Because with just general speculative fiction on its own, you can be more vague and nebulous about what the powers do and exactly how they work. But when you're dealing with lit RPG, one of the ways you can show progression is by subdividing these things. The number of targets, who they can target, the magnitude of the damage, how much energy it costs for them to perform the ability, and the cooldown between uses of the ability, range, area of effect, all of that kind of stuff. Any of those things that if you looked at the stats on a D&D spell or on a World of Warcraft ability, those individual stats are things that you would kind of want to deal with and um, break down and take into consideration as you're building out your system. So, I don't know if there are any questions so far. Let me know because that's the overview I kind of wanted to get into. Next, I want to talk about some downsides, give you some recommendations if you are interested in it, and then we can go into the updates and the Q&A. So I do see Neil mentioning Hedge Wizard. I haven't actually read Hedge Wizard. I'll have to make a note of that and see what I think. So, downsides. This is probably going to make some people angry, but there's some very definite downsides to LitRPG if you are considering about going into it as a reader, or even if you're looking about going into it as a writer. Their LitRPG is currently almost exclusively indie authors. And that means that it comes with a wide range of quality of story and quality of writing, um, with the bell curve sitting more on the lower end of quality, simply because it is all indie. There's a lot, especially with LitRPG. It's a oh, I just got it. No, that's not good. Hopefully, it fixed itself. I got an error from YouTube saying it's not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. Um, don't know what happened there. Okay, I guess I will keep going as best I can. Um, yeah, so the quality can vary wildly. So if you prefer well written, well crafted stuff, if you're used to reading Brandon Sanderson, Brian McClellan, or Robert McCammon, or some of those like that, and you haven't dipped as much into some of the indie stuff, you're going to want to be careful, because it can be very frustrating. Some of the other aspects is there currently tends to be a lot more favoring of um, power fantasy, and by power fantasy, that's kind of Mary Sue, Harry Stew type characters where they're just epic and awesome for reasons, and the story is just following them being epic and awesome and blasting through any barrier that is put in their path. I don't fully understand why, and this is where I started to realize I don't think I'm actually the primary lit RPG readership at the moment. I don't understand why people like that. I like more conflict, and I like things to be a struggle. That is something that is in there. If that is something that bothers you, you again may want to tread lightly in lit RPG. Um, the last thing, representation, is also currently an issue in lit RPG. Most of it is just generic male protagonists. Um, and even when they're not generic, most of them are male protagonists. If you're looking for stories with people of color or stories with female protagonists, those are much fewer and further between. Um, Fairly new genre. I'm hoping that this grows and changes over time. But at the moment, if that is important to you, that will be a little harder to find, and you may have to dig deeper. There are lit RPG stories with female protagonists. You will probably want to go onto Reddit or somewhere and find a recommendation list. It's probably going to be hard for you to just find them on your own. So those are the big downsides. And the other part with the quality is I mentioned that I consider this an itch genre. And there are certain genres where they, again, the reason I use this term, I don't remember where I heard it initially, but having like that neural itch that gets scratched and is very satisfying. In itch genres, that's actually all the readers care about. Quality of the story, the quality of the writing, and the nature, or whether things are problematic, or whether they get political or not, doesn't matter as long as it scratches the itch. And that's where some of the romance genres can sit, and that's where some of the urban fantasy stuff can sit. And Lit RPG is definitely seems to be one of those. So, just some things to be aware of if you were going in as a reader, because that is something I've been frustrated with. I've been reading pretty heavily in the genre for years now, and I have found a handful of books that I really, really recommend, and a lot that have just been very deeply frustrating to me. And because I'm not here just for the itch scratching. If you want more than that, that's just something to be aware of, which does bring me to my recommendations that I have. If you do want to try out Lit RPG, I have some books that you should try. My favorite series are Viridian Gate Online by James Hunter, and that series is complete and it's very good. There's a part where things start to feel a little bit the samey, but then he completely changes everything that's happening in the world and goes in a whole new direction. Another one is Ascend Online by Luke Chimlenko. Both of those are phenomenally well written, well edited, well done. The stories are great. I love them so much. I have listened to those series multiple times. Another one, I mentioned He Who Fights with Monsters. That's one of my favorites. That is not for everybody. I haven't been able to pin down what type of people do and don't like it. I really liked it. Um, Try book one, and I I fell in love with it by the time he was before he was even fully out of the hedge maze, which will make sense when you read it. But again, that one seems to be hit or miss, and I don't fully track when it doesn't. I don't fully understand when it doesn't hit with people. But those are good ones. Dungeon Crawler Carl is also another very popular one that is absolutely fantastic. Another thing to be aware of is that none of the ones that I'm recommending are PG at all, especially Dungeon Crawler Carl. That that one's brutal and gross, and makes the terrible person inside of me very, very happy. That one is more horror, so bear that in mind. If you want some sci-fi stuff, I have not dabbled as much on the sci-fi side of lit RPG. There isn't as much of that to begin with. There is some, but one series that I found that I really liked is called The Game, and by Cosimo Yap. The first book is Opening Moves, and I talked about before one of the main things with lit RPG is figuring out the reasoning for why the system exists and why the characters are in the system. The game is cool. Now, I not to confuse that with the game series uh, by oh god, Beck, I'm forgetting Terry's last name, which is also supposed to be successful. But Opening Moves with Cosmo Yap, um, basically aliens have shown up, they made contact with Earth, and we are suddenly included in a much wider universe. But there's no violence in the universe because everything is managed in the game. A perfect simulation of the real world where you load in, you can develop your class, you can build up your character stuff, and the way the power dynamics and resources in the real world are determined is by how things are playing out in the game, in the simulation version of it. So, if a nation or a race or whatever takes over a planet, they actually gain the resources in real life. They can start gaining control and using the resources of that planet they took over in the game. Something I found very interesting. It was a very fun read for me. There are also some non-lit RPG ones that I liked that are more progression fantasy. The biggest one of those being Mother of Learning by I always butcher the name. Uh, Domovoy Kavoyich. I'm gonna pull up a pronunciation of this real quick. That doesn't help. Domogoy Kramayak, and it is so good, so good. Mother of Learning is Harry Potter meets Groundhog Day. That's kind of how I think of it. And it is heavy progression fantasy elements rather than lit RPG elements. It doesn't have the mechanics, but it has a lot of the nuance and detail of building um, building skills and ability over time. and I just realized that I didn't press record on OBS. So if I want to use any of this later, uh, I'm just gonna have to download from YouTube. Um, but yeah, Mother of Learning is really good. It is very, it is very big. There's a lot to it, which I had a friend of mine who has a hard time getting through books, dyslexia and some other stuff. Book one leaves on a really heavy cliffhanger, and she was really mad. She's like, I've been here for 30 hours slowly getting through this. Not that it wasn't good, but I can't do anymore. So that's something to bear in mind. But also, the Sufficiently Advanced Magic by Andrew Rowe, part of the Arcane Ascension series. I've only read like the first two books. That's another really good progression fantasy series that I found. Um, so those are my main recommendations. I do have some others that I will um, that if you want to know, I can dig some of them up. Oh, Mayor of Noobtown is a good one. That one is definitely adult only. Just the terminology and stuff that gets used, and the swearing and all of that. Definitely something to bear in mind. But that is also quite good. So, yeah. So those are my recommendations. That's basically everything that I wanted to go through, and that brings me about to the half-hour mark, which is what I was hoping to hit. Cradle is good. I have read by Will White. I've read the first one. That one is a progression fantasy cultivation. That's a pretty good example if you're wanting to know what cultivation is like. Um, so there is that. So Ikursoni, Ikur, I don't know how to pronounce your username, but in a nutshell, what is LitRPG? It is speculative fiction that has game mechanics in the story. So your characters have character sheets, they gain experience, they level up, they make decisions about their new feats, about their new stats, about their new abilities, and it is relative in the game. They have boss battles, and the nature of the game mechanics will often depend on the nature of the game that it is emulating, such as MMORPGs, more, or if it's doing more of a solo RPG, that kind of thing. In a nutshell, that's what LitRPG is. You'll be able to see the rest of this when this is done. You can go back to the beginning. You should be able to go back to the beginning now, but um, not not like game books back in the 80s. Similar. If you've read if you've read anything by R.A. Salvatore, like The Dragonlance um, or Forgotten Realms, if you just put the character sheets, the actual character sheets in there. So we look at Dritz, and he is a level 10 drow fighter with dual weapon feats, and his stats are X, Y, and Z. That is lit RPG. And now, in a more general term, general sense, lit RPG is just applying game mechanics to anything. So it can be as open or narrow as you like. All right. So, any questions about LitRPG, about magic systems, about whatever? I'm going to give you guys a second with that, and then we'll go on from there. Because I know some people when they stream are really good about balancing reading the chat and while they're talking and all of that. Yeah, people have said the volume is low before, and I'm not sure what's going on with that. I haven't figured it out because when I watch my oh, sorry guys. When I watch the audio spikes, it looks like I'm peaking in the red a lot. So I'm not entirely sure what to do about that. I think there's a problem with this mic that I need to get fixed. But okay, so Neil, if you want to tackle lit RPG or progression, is there a way to tackle writing where it isn't just wish fulfillment? Because okay, don't really like the Gary slash Mary Sue's. Yeah, it's It's the same as if you were writing fantasy, right? Making sure that the obstacles are actually significant and that the obstacles that the characters face. Um, it did get better when I moved my mic closer. Okay. I think I just need to get a different mic, which that's a whole different side frustration that I've had. I'm trying to be louder and clearer to help with that, but I've gone through a couple different headsets and they've just all been unsatisfactory compared to what my old one did. Um, I I need to investigate and figure that out. But in terms of making it so it's not wish fulfillment, it's making it so that the obstacles are actually obstacles and using try fail cycles. So the characters try things and they fail at them. They die sometimes. And not just because of random chance, but because they weren't skilled enough. They were missing tools or skills or abilities or things that they needed. That's really what it is. And fortunately, what that means is you can find a lot of information about avoiding Mary/Gary Sue's in your fantasy. You can find a lot of information about that online, and all of that applies. The This is a situation where and this is part of why I disagree with the idea of that the main character needs a hack or a special thing that makes them extra powerful compared to others. Is those tend to feed very easily into Gary/Mary Sue's, but apparently that is a thing that just a bunch of people want. Um, and I'm just not that kind of reader. So that's what I would recommend is looking into stuff like that. But the main thing really is just um, making sure the obstacles are actually obstacles. And there's more conversation we could have about this when it comes to designing your plots, so that you are matching conflict. You are pitting conflicts against your character's weaknesses rather than their strengths. This is something I say when I'm giving presentations about building magic systems or the magic system blueprint or dealing with balance. And I know it's something that Becca always laughs when I talk about this. But if you have a character who is strong enough to like punch a hole in a sun or blow up a sun, that's super powerful. But if it's a book about romance, that power doesn't really help them on the dating scene in many good ways. Maybe a little bit, but not much. So that's a place where you are matching the conflict to the person's weakness rather than to their competence. And there's ways that you can do that. And then you can bounce back and forth between managing that. So it's not entirely frustrating, but it's a thing of like, great, you're awesome at fighting. Nobody can defeat you on the battle. Unfortunately, this problem can only be solved 50% with fighting. The other 50% is being nice and negotiating, and you're not so good at that. Like, there's stuff like that that you can do to help manage that. And yeah, it's not to say that having an edge automatically leads to that kind of Harry Sue or Gary Mary Sue, but I think that is a place where people get confused with that. Is they give them too big an edge, and then things just become trivial, or it's not even necessary. There's some that I've read, some very popular ones that I've read, where the main character is just awesome because, and they just go around being awesome. But yeah, making it so the conflicts are actual conflicts that they don't just automatically win is the main way to deal with that. Yeah, I'll have to check out Hedge Wizard. Even just from the name, I can get a vibe for that because in general, Hedge Wizards aren't that powerful if they're running with some of the terminology with that kind of thing. So that might be interesting. Um, okay, so that brings us to some of the updates and things that I want to talk about. There's a couple of things going on here. One, I'm probably not going to be doing much more on YouTube until later in 2025. I'm not stepping away permanently, but for a lot of reasons. One, I've been looking at my stats on my channel. I've been looking at the time I have available, the projects that are coming up, and the conferences and stuff that are coming up. And I don't have as much time to. I don't have the time I need and the energy and bandwidth I need to actually invest into enough content to make it worthwhile um, for my viewers and to a certain extent for YouTube, because YouTube starts tanking some of that stuff. But so with that, that's one thing. I'm going to need to focus in on some of the projects that I have going on. The other part of that is I've been realizing some bits about the nature of entertainment and where I tend to fall on the spectrum of entertaining versus deep dive into topics, and starting to wrap my head around why I have been struggling in some of the ways with where I sit and how I can start bridging some of that gap. So I'm going to be changing a little bit of how I do some of my content, hopefully starting about halfway through 2025. That's what I'm targeting, is July, wanting to do some of these changes. And in addition to that, there's going to be a bit of an overhaul on how I'm talking about things, because I've been thinking through some stuff and I have been able to fill in some of the gaps that have been bothering me for a while. Not all of them. I don't know if that I will ever fill in all of the gaps, but I've been filling in some of the gaps, and it's going to involve a little bit of starting over in terms of what I talk about. So when I come back, I'm going to be redoing some of the videos about what is a magic system, having some other things where I'm talking about the level above magic systems that is an umbrella term that catches a bunch of the other stuff that I like to talk about. So there's going to be some adjustment and some change in direction. There's going to be more topics. So LitRPG in game stuff is going to start being involved a little bit. Um, so yeah, things are going to be changing, and I have to remind myself of this. I, if you didn't know this, I am writing full time now. I don't have my day job anymore, and that was 2024. That was like May 2024. Hasn't even been a full year yet. So there's a lot of learning and stuff that I'm going through with process and how much work I can handle all at once and all of that kind of thing. So I really appreciate you guys who showed up, and I really appreciate all of the support that you guys have been giving me on YouTube. Um, and I'm not abandoning it. I am going to be coming back, but this is part of that learning curve of me figuring out how I can approach things in a way that is best for me and best for you guys. So, with that, one of the big things in the meantime and actually moving forward is the best thing is if you join my newsletter, which I'm going to drop here in the chat. That is going to be the best way to stay up to date on all of my stuff, because I'm going to continue providing content to my newsletter. And this is going to be part of the restructuring in terms of content production that I do. So my newsletter is, they're going to get the actual monthly update. So if you want to know what's going on with me and with my content and with my books and stuff like that, newsletter is where you need to be. Also, I'm going to be working towards doing more premium content as well, available on Patreon and other places. And my newsletter will get some versions of that content first, and they will get versions of the content that is not available to the general public anywhere. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, definitely sign up for the newsletter. Hope to see you there. Um, but this is what I was talking about, man. I get going. I get excited to be talking with you guys, and I'm not as good at checking at the chat as we go. So, any questions about any of it? What I'm talking about, some of the changes that are coming, anything that I talked about earlier, any questions that have been bothering you with your stories or anything like that? And I will just be good and quiet for at least a minute to give you guys a chance to write some stuff up. A minute. I should set a timer. Otherwise, I'm going to start talking again. I am still doing consulting. Yes, that is something that is still going on. So if you want help with your systems or with your story, you can contact me through my website. I still do the coaching. I still do the consulting. I still work with people on building their magic systems. That is not changing. Um, so you don't need to worry about that. If you need that, you can reach out. And also, if you're not sure if you need that, I do have consultations, shorter consultations, so that we can see if we work together well and if I can in fact help you, which is another thing that I want to get better about letting people know about. Will I still do coaching via the Patreon? I think so. I'm I'm gonna need to examine some of that stuff. It's actually probably going to be some of me spending time talking with you about that, Becca. But I think so. It is so currently. If you want to do the coaching with me, people on my newsletter get a discount, and people on Patreon get a discount. And at some of the tiers with Patreon, you can get a massive discount with some caveats and addendums about how that content works. But I'm not planning on changing that. I'm planning on keeping that, maybe tweaking some of the forms of it a bit, but I'm hoping to keep that there. Any other questions? All right. I think the last thing I'm going to say is for any of you guys who are here watching, um, please, if you have ideas about talking about this kind of content or your own take on any of the stuff that I've said, please talk about it. If you have your own channel, if you have your own blog, if you have anything like that, don't don't be afraid of be like, oh, this is Clark's idea. I can't run with this. Because part of what I have realized with all of this is I operate at like sort of a mid technical level, um, where when I'm building content, I'm building it at like an education course level, like a textbook level is where I think and write through a lot of things. I don't do as deep a dive into all of the nuance that I could, or that there is to happen on this topic. I also don't do as much of the entry level stuff. That's one of the things that I'm hoping to change. So I I don't own the concept of magic systems. I guess that's kind of my point. Is if you do content creation, I'm going to start trying to encourage more people to talk about it, to start using some of these terms, and just trying to expand some of the awareness of this because Um, I'm one person. I can't cover the breadth of it all, and I shouldn't cover the breadth of it all because there are going to be other people that have new ways of looking at things that are going to help people understand it in ways that I can't. So, all right. Well, that is what I got. Thank you everybody for showing up. Um, I so check out the newsletter. I will probably drop some things on the community from time to time, but that's going to be about it. Next year, hopefully, is going to be a big year with the LitRPG series starting to come out. Hopefully, we get all three out next year, changing how I'm doing some of this content, constantly tweaking my schedule to try and find something that is sustainable while continuing to build and provide enough in the different areas. And I am rambling again. So, but thank you guys for being here. I hope you had a terrific holidays, and I hope you are set for an amazing new year. And just whatever you do, get out of here, keep writing, and stay awesome. Bye, guys.